Good afternoon, everybody. We'll just give it a few minutes to see, to give people a chance to join, and then we'll get started properly. So hi everybody and welcome back. Like I say, we're just going to give it a few minutes and then we will get started properly. Just give people a few minutes to arrive. Hi Peter. And I hope everybody's doing well this week. We've got some beautiful, beautiful weather here today. So as soon as we're done with this, I'm going to get outside and enjoy some sunshine. You've got to soak it up while you can in Scotland, so got to make the most of it. Hi Bruce, hi Devon, nice to see you again. So yeah, we'll give it just till a couple of minutes past and then we will get started. So as always, if you've got any questions, just pop them into the chat and we will address them. Hi Gabby. Hi Gregorio. Hi Peter, nice to hear that you're getting some nice weather there as well. I've never been to the west coast of Canada. I've been to sort of the Toronto area, but that's the only part of Canada I've been to. I'd love to go over and see the west. The closest I've been is probably Seattle, which isn't quite there. Okay, so we've got a question from Gregorio about using the random function, so we'll have a look at that. And as always, just pop your questions in the chat and we will get started. So Lonnie had sent in a stack for us to take a look at, but I don't see him here yet, so I'm going to wait and see if he arrives, because he might just be a little bit late. If not, he can always catch up on the replay, because there are a few useful things in there. But let's get started. So I'll just start by sharing my screen. To close these folders. And oh, Lonnie is here. Hi Lonnie, I was just saying that you sent in a stack that we're going to take a look at, but I wanted to make sure you were here before we had a look at it. So we'll have a look at the question that Gregorio has asked first, and then we will have a look at Lonnie's stacks. Oh, Gabby, you say you couldn't get access to the slides to session 6. So they should be underneath the replay video on YouTube. If they're not there, if they haven't been put up yet, then I will check in with Heather and see if she knows what's happened there, because I think they should be there. It's just, but if you can access all the other ones and not those ones, then yeah, sounds like something's up there. So we will have a look into that. So Gregorio has asked about using the random function, and if it's only for integers or if it can be used to randomize a set of cards. So the random function itself is just for integers, but what you can do is you can use the integer that you get from the random function to achieve whatever it is that you want. So the random function gives you a number between 1 and whatever the upper limit you give it is. So it's always, so it's, yes, here it says a positive number that would be rounded to an integer greater than or equal to 1. So you're never going to get 0 from the random function. You'll get a number between 1 and the upper limit. So if I create a little stack here, I'll put a button on it. Just turn my text size up a bit there in the preferences. Okay, so if we add a mouse up handler, and then if I say answer random 100, and it's because it's a function, the value goes inside brackets. And when we click this, we'll get a random number between 1 and 100. So each time we do this, it should give us a random number. These are all quite high, but that is, oh, there's a 3. So this will give us a random number. Now, because it only works with integers, what you can do is you can use the integer that you get to give you something else random. So if I put some letters into a list, so there is the alphabet. So if I put that into a variable, let's call that T alpha, and then I'll put a random number up to 26 into another variable, T index. And then what I can do is I can put item T index of T alpha. I'll actually just answer that so we see what we get. And this should give us a random letter from the letters of the alphabet. So what's actually happening here is I'm building my list, and these are comma separated. Then I get a random number between 1 and 26. So in this case, it's 4. And then I'm answering item 4 of A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, J, K. So that will give me item 4, which is D. So we get D. So the way that the item delimiter, if we haven't discussed the item delimiter before, I can't remember. So by default, the item delimiter in LiveCode is a comma. So you can say item 1, item 26. You can say item 1 to 3, which would give you ABC. You can also go from the end backwards. So as well as being item 26, this is also item -1, -2, -3. And by default, the item delimiter, so the separator, is comma, but you can also change that. So you could set your item delimiter to be a colon. You could set the item delimiter to be slash. And that allows you to do all different things with, we call them chunk expressions. So it's a chunk of something. So in this case, it's a chunk of this list. So that's a way that you can use random, even though it'll only give you a number. You can then use that number to randomize something else. So Gregorio specifically asked about randomizing a set of cards. So in that case, I guess what you might mean is that you might want to go to a random card, in which case you could go to random. So it would be go to card index, where we would have put random. I think off the top of my head, I can say the number of cards in this stack. So that would give us a number between 1 and the number of cards in the stack, and then we could go to a random card. And that's how you would do it. And equally, if you wanted to build a list of randomized things, you would do a loop. You would get a random number. You would probably have to keep track of the random numbers that you had already used, but you could then build up the list from each sort of random selection. So if you wanted to randomly organize your cards, you would get the number of cards of the stack. Then you would note down that you'd already used 4 or 2, and then you get another random number, check that it's not already one of the ones you've used, and you could build up a randomized list like that. Okay, so hopefully that will be helpful. So Peter's asked if we can say something about the advantages or disadvantages of using a list as opposed to a one-dimensional array. So I guess the main, the main thing with chunk expressions in LiveCode is that they are very fast. So you can build a list. This could be brought in from a text file. You can change the item delimiter. You can do things like that. You can print this out easily. Using an array is also fast. And if you've got a one-dimensional array that's numerically keyed, then it would really just be a preference. This might be easier if you're reading this in from somewhere. The time that it would take to write this list in code to build an array, put A into T array 1, put B, but then you could write a loop to do that. So in that case, there's probably not a lot in it. What is really useful with the chunk expressions is the ability to sort of do a spread or a range. So being able to say item 2 to 7 and get that, and to be able to go backwards to go, item 3 to item -3 to item -7. There's a lot of strength in that. And of course, you could do all those things with arrays, but in each of those cases, if you wanted to get item 3 to 7, you'd have to loop. You have to write a loop with x equals 3 to 7 and get T array x and build your list, as opposed to just in that one line of code being able to say item 3 to -7. It's also quite useful for working with things like file paths. You can set the item delimiter to a slash, and then you can get item 1 to -2 of a file path, and that'll give you the folder that you're currently working in. You can do things with lines and tab separated and columns, so you can get. So here we're just using this, but if this was line separated as well, you can say things like put item 3 of line 4 of T text. So you can combine it. You can combine items and lines. You can combine. There's words, so you can say word 3 of line 4 of T text if you want to get a specific word out of a block of text. You can use, so there's characters, words, items, and lines. Those are your main different item delimiters that you can use. And there's just a lot of strength in the ways that you can build up expressions that will give you a chunk of text in a way that it might be much more convoluted to do with an array. Obviously, arrays are really powerful in other ways, especially if you've got a multidimensional array, if you want to be able to jump straight to the actual information. So obviously an array is a data structure, whereas these can be used just with a paragraph of text to get something out of it. So it's a case of just picking the right tool for the job. If you're just using a list, then an array probably would be quite useful, but depending on what you're actually wanting to do, if you're working with like comma separated values that you've imported, then using text chunk expressions can be really powerful. And Guru has commented, you could use it for a card ID number. Yes, absolutely, you could use it for that. You can refer to cards as their numbers 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, as well as their names, menu, settings, whatever they might be. So Devin's commented that when we email out the recording notification, we give a URL back to rewatch it in Webinar Jam, not to the link on YouTube. So I'll mention that to Heather. We can maybe start including the YouTube link as well. The slides often go up a few days later because I have to write them up afterwards because not sure what we've talked about until we've done it. But yeah, maybe it would be really useful to include the YouTube link as well as the Webinar Jam link. I think it's probably because the Webinar Jam replay is available immediately, whereas with YouTube, we need to get the video from Webinar Jam and upload it, but I think that's probably a good thing to add, so I will mention that to Heather. Okay, so since we don't have any other questions just now, let's take a look at Lonnie's stack. So thank you for sending this in, Lonnie. What he's done is used a few of the things that we've looked at and built up a sort of test stack that shows a lot of the features that we've talked about. And there were a few issues with it, so I took a look at it, and I think they're all actually really useful to look at. Some of them are things that maybe I didn't cover as clearly as possible as I could have, and some of them are the sort of things that will trip you up when you're working on your stacks yourself. Just the sort of, gotchas to look out for and mistakes that even all of us who've been working with LiveCode for years still make. So here's the stack. So let me just open this up here. So there's some nice logging in here. And first stack, let's get started. And here we have a nice list of useful LiveCode videos. And so the first thing that Lonnie mentioned was how to get the pieces of information about the highlighted line. So let's have a look at the code in here. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to focus on the mouse up here, and then I'll comment on the get prop. But Lonnie hasn't actually used this custom property here. So the first thing that I'm going to comment on is what we're doing is we're answering the data a name, which is giving us the name field of the highlighted line. And initially this isn't working. It's giving us empty. And the reason for that, if I go back to that card again, there's my own face, that's always fun. So if I go back to this card again, and we have a look at the code, stretch this out a bit, then you'll see, I can probably make this a bit smaller, but you can still see what's going on. Then you'll see that the column names actually have quotation marks around them. And so the quotation marks in this case are actually part of the string that is the name of the column. So the name of the column isn't name, the name of the column is quote, N-A-M-E quote. But here, where we're doing our answer dialog, we're just referring to it as name. And although there are quotes here, these quotes tell LiveCode that this is a string. So it only sees this part, which is just N-A-M-E, whereas here it's quote, N-A-M-E quote. And so what's happening is if I roll this again, and if we use our variable watcher to look in here, you'll see that the name actually has those quotes in it. And this name doesn't have quotes, it's just the letters, because these are discarded, or they're not considered part of the string by LiveCode. So in this case, what we would need to do is we would have to, the name would be the quote character, and then an ampersand to concatenate the strings together, to glue them together, and then the string NAME, and then another quote. And this will work. So what had happened was we were looking at an element in the array, but we were looking with the wrong sort of name for the element, which is part of the problem there. And so now that's coming out correctly. And then here we're going to card browser page. Now, if we let that run and we go to the browser page, then you'll see the way Lonnie wanted this to work was be able to enter the URL here and load it. And if we type one in and click load, it works fine. But really, the goal was to be able to pick one of these, click the button, it'll go to the card with the browser on it, which will display the video, and it'll start showing the video from here. Now, the easiest way to do that is to directly set the text of this field here when we click the button on the previous card. And we can do that just by referring to the field with its full address, including the card, because if we refer, the field is called HTML, I think. So here what we do is we put, and again, we need our quotes because our URL field up here has quotes around it, but in this case it's URL, not browser. So that will give us the value of the URL of the highlighted line. And we can put it straight into field HTML of card browser page. Because we're on a different card, we need to say field HTML of card browser page, because if we didn't have of card browser page here, LiveCode would be looking for a field called HTML on the current card, and there isn't one. And if there was one, it would set that and not the one on card browser page. And then we just go to card browser page. So if we apply that, So we've selected one of our videos here. That's our name. And now if we click on load here, it will load up the video that we selected. Should do, but again, sorry, I forgot to mention this. Again, we've got quotes here, and that's because the quotes are in the data grid. So what we can do here is we can use those chunk expressions that we talked about earlier. There's actually quite a few ways you could do this. It'll depend what works best for you. But what we can do is we can put character 2 to -2 of the URL into field HTML. And so character 2 is H and character -1 is the second last character, which will be the last character before the quote at the end. And so that should work. Oh, I did not apply my script there. That's why that didn't change. So you can now see that those quotes are gone from our URL. And if we click load, it will load up the video that we selected. Now, of course, if we wanted this to happen automatically when we open the card, what we can do is we can take the code from our load button, which is just set the URL of widget browser to field HTML. And in our card script, we don't have an open card or a pre-open card here. So up at the top, I'll add an on open card, and we'll set the URL of widget browser to field HTML, which is the field we updated on the previous card. And now if we go back and we choose a different video, it should automatically load up when we go to the card. So this gives us a really nice this is a nice index for our videos. We just select one, we go to the watch page, and it's all loaded up and ready to go and started for us. Now, the other thing that Lonnie mentioned and wanted to ask about was using global variables. And so you can see in the code here, we've got this gUse URL, and that is to allow him to switch between using a URL and using HTML text. And if you can think back to whichever session we did about loading YouTube videos, if you want to use the URL, use the URL property. If you want to use the embed code for the video, which allows you just to have the video player and not the headers and the up next and the information, then you would use the HTML text. So this global variable is just to say whether to use the URL or not. So there's a couple of things here. So the first thing is that if you're going to use a global variable, you always need to declare that it is a global variable so that LiveCode knows it's a global variable and not just a temporary variable that happens to have the same name. So for example, in our resize stack, if we want to be able to use the global variable gUse URL and to use the same variable as used elsewhere, we need to, what's the right word? We need to declare it here. So we need to declare that we're actually using the global variable gUse URL. And the other thing to mention is that anything like this, like if statements, other things that are outside of a handler, so not between on and end, LiveCode will just ignore these. It won't see this as code that you've written. The only things that work outside of handlers are variable declarations. So this would need to be inside our resize stack handler. So after we've declared that we're using the global variable, this is where we would have our if gUse URL is true, then we'd have our end if, and we wouldn't have another resize stack, we'd just have that. So now we have our else, then we have what to do if it's not true, then we would have our resize stack, then we would end our if, and then we'd end our resize stack. And if we want to do a variable check here, we don't need to say is set to, we just say if gUse URL is true, then if gUse URL is true, then do all this. Else, we don't need the if there. Do all this, end our if, and we'll pass resize stack actually regardless. So we'll do that at the end to make sure that if we've got any geometry set elsewhere, it'll get the message that it needs in order to use the geometry library to lay everything out. So now what we're doing is we're inside our resize stack command. We've declared that we're using the global G use URL. So that will have, LiveCode will recognize that that's a global variable and it will have the correct value in it. Then we check to see if G use URL is true. If it is, then we're using our field HTML label. Otherwise, else, we're setting the text to enter and the embed code. So that's how we use global variables. You need to be careful with them just to make sure that you're always declaring them when you're going to use them, so that LiveCode knows that you're talking about the global variable and not just prepending, is that a word? Prefixing it with a G. That's just sort of coding standard, a suggestion, so that you remember that that's a global variable. LiveCode doesn't actually do anything with that. It doesn't recognize that. So you need to have the global variable declaration so that LiveCode knows it's using a global variable. And I think that was it, Lonnie. Other than that, I think your stack was working really well. So it was just a couple of little things. And the other things that I mentioned, for example, where I'm using character 2 to -2 of the data A and then the quotes. You could do that different ways. You could delete character 1 and delete character -1. You could replace quote with empty. There's multiple ways you could do that. But if you're pretty sure that that it's a sort of a standard format with a quote at the start and a quote at the end, then I would use character 2 to -2 just to strip those off and use the bit in the middle. Okay, so I'm just going to have a quick look at the quotes here. So Lonnie, yes, you declared it in the stack script and that would work, but you have to declare it every time you're going to use it. So I think, would it work? Questioning myself now. Where is it? So it's here. So that would work for the stack script, but you would need to also declare it on the card script and inside anywhere that you are using it. You just have to be quite careful with globals, so that if you just declare it that one time in the stack script, that's not enough. That's enough for the stack script. That will then, anything in the stack script should recognize that is that global variable. Once you're outside of that script, and in a card script or an object script, then you would need to declare the global variable, just so that LiveCode's clear that you're using that variable again and again. Otherwise, it will try to recreate one. If we didn't have this here, this wasn't in here, if this was like this, then the use URL, that would just be seen as a new temporary variable that is empty to begin with, so it would be not true. So this would create a new variable and it wouldn't recognize that it was the same, that you wanted to use the same one. That's why you always have to declare it. Okay, so let's have a look. I'm just going to see if there's any questions about what we've been talking about. So Nicole's commented, are global variables not frowned upon in LiveCode? Yes, in general, we do suggest that you try to not use global variables, but they are there and they do work. And people who are used to coding in a certain way, who don't want to give up their global variables, then you can, they are there and they are available. But we would generally, ideally, suggest that people don't use them. We don't use them in our LiveCode development. There's other ways you can do it. You can do it with custom properties. You can use script local variables, things like that, that get around the need for global variables. But they are implemented. They do work in LiveCode, so they are there as an option. So Lonnie has asked, so global only handles the card URL. No, the global variable is stack wide. So the global variable can be accessed anywhere in the stack. It is a true global variable, but in order for LiveCode to know that you are referring to that global variable, you have to declare that you are about to use the global variable. So you're not recreating it. This global variable is global to the stack and can be accessed by anywhere in the stack, by any card, by any object with the current value. But you need to basically say, hey, LiveCode, this variable I'm about to use, I want to use that global variable with this name. So that's why you need to declare it. You're basically declaring that you're about to use it. So it's it is accessible everywhere as a global variable and can be used anywhere in the stack, but you have to specify that that is the variable that you are using the global variable GU's URL. Otherwise, LiveCode won't know that. And because LiveCode doesn't require variable declaration, then this is completely correct. But in this case, it would just create a new variable, a new temporary variable that only belongs within the resize stack handler that would be discarded at the end. So because you want to use the global variable, you have to declare it. There is a section that goes into quite a bit of detail on this in the help menu. Let me open up. So in the user guide, which is accessible from the help menu, and this probably explains it better than I'm managing to right now. So we do have a variables section, and in here there is a section on global variables. And so I'm just going to read it out to you because I think it's quite small on the screen. So a global variable can be used in any handler anywhere in the application. Unlike a local variable, a global variable retains its value even after the handler that created it finishes executing. Unlike a script local variable, a global variable can be used in any handler in any object script. The same global variable can be used by any stack. You can declare it in one stack and use it in others. But it does say here in this section, you must also use the global command at the start of a handler to make an existing global variable available to the handler. That's a better way of putting it. While a global variable can be used by any handler, you must do this in any handler you're going to use it in. If you don't declare a global variable before using it, the handler will not take the global variable's existence into account and will simply create a local variable with the same name. And that's when you can run into things like the variable not having the value that you expect it to, and that's because it's not actually looking at the global variable, it's looking at a newly created temporary variable that has the same name as your global variable. So if you need a bit more, have a look at the variables chapter in the user guide, which starts on page 113. And that's probably a bit clearer than I'm actually managing to explain it here. Okay, so I'm just going to have a quick look at the questions. Okay, so we've got a few here that we can pick up. So I'm just going to see if there's anything about what we're talking about. So Peter said, with respect to discouraging use of global variables, I have a stack in which a particular file is used in multiple handlers. I set the file name as a global variable so it can be accessed anywhere. Are you suggesting there's a better way of making that file name globally available? So not necessarily better. If you're used to using global variables and you're happy with them and they don't cause you any problems, then carry on. We're not suggesting that I don't want to suggest that you change your coding style that you're used to. But in that case, I would probably write a function that I could call whenever I wanted that file name and get it back. And maybe I would store it in a custom property of the stack. Maybe I would store it in a script local variable on the stack script. And what I would do is I would say, I would have a function like get base file path, and it would send it back to me. That's how I would do it, and that's often because you can put some sort of error checking in there. You can check in that function, you can check if the file exists, and if it doesn't exist, you can return an error that your handler can then handle. But if the global variable works for you, then use the global variable. Yeah, it's just there's a lot of sort of writing and reasons for not using global variables. They're generally discouraged. It's not my absolute area of expertise. I just tend not to use them. But if you're interested in it, then there's lots of reading that you can do about why global variables are discouraged. But like I say, they are available in LiveCode. If you want to use them, then use them. I'll see if I can find anything explicit about why they are becoming discouraged, and I'll link to it in the slides. But yeah, if I was doing that, I would write a function that would just return me the file path whenever I wanted it, rather than accessing the global variable. But that's just the way that I've sort of become accustomed to writing my code. Okay, so let's see if what other questions we can look at, if there's anything to, I think that's everything on what we're talking about just now. So I'll have a look at some of the other questions that have come up. So Daniel's asked about iOS native fields and how you can create an iOS native field and how you can configure any iOS button to make it look awesome. So you create a native field, and I think I covered this in the last set of slides. It might have been before that, but if you want to create a native iOS or Android text input control, and you do it in code and use mobile control create. And there are 5 types of controls that you can create like this. You can create browsers, scrollers, players, input, which is single line input, and multi-line, which is multi-line input. So you do mobile control create, the control type, browser, scroller, player, input, or multi-line, and then you give it a name. And then use mobile control set to set its properties. There's a whole list here. It depends on what type of control it is. But if you're looking at text input properties, then there's the text property, which is the text that's actually displayed, fonts, alignments, text sizes, things like that. There's also the standard ones. I think they're at the top of the list here, which are things like visible, rect, which is the area that it takes up. Yes, so there's the global properties. So the rect, which is the bounds of the control, visible, alpha, and background color. And there's some that are only for iOS and not supported on Android, opaque, and ignore voice over sensitivity. So yes, if you want to create a native mobile text input on iOS or Android, you would use mobile control create, set up the parameters using mobile control set to get it looking how you want, and then you would use mobile control get to get the parameters. So the main one there would be to get the text. Once the user is typed in to the field and you want to get whatever they have input, you would use mobile control get, name of your control, and the text property, and that would give you back what it is that you want. And I think I covered this in one of the previous sets of slides, but if not, I will cover it in the next one. I think we have a slide on this. We've also got some lessons. Let me see if I can find a nice lesson on text input controls. And if we don't have one, I should probably make one, because they are very common. So if we go to the LiveCode Mobile Tasks section, I'll just search for text. How do I use native text controls on mobile? This is what we want. And so this is a more in-depth. I think the slide that I made was very brief, and it was just basically mobile control create, mobile control sets and parameters. But this goes into a lot more detail about how all the things that you can do, the different properties, how you can make it look. So that's a good lesson. And using a native control, you will get all the native behavior. So the cut and copy and paste, being able to hold on it to put the cursor in, etc. So they are worth using on, definitely worth using on mobile apps. And similarly for scrollers, players, multi-line, and I think that's it, scrollers, players, multi-line. You create them in the same way. You just mobile control create, player or scroller or whatever it is you want. And we've got lessons on most of those as well. And in terms of buttons, if you are just using sort of LiveCode native buttons, then you can do quite a lot with just the properties. So turn off 3D, change the border, do some colors, have the border color, nice light gray, change the text size. So I would say that try just using all the properties, see if you can get it looking how you want it to just by playing around with all the properties. We can make that rounded. So yeah, so I would start off with just playing around with the properties. If you are interested, there's a third-party add-on which gives you more sort of native controls. I should have some available. I can maybe show you. They don't look, you can't really see them in the IDE. They only really appear once you deploy to a simulator or to a device. But it's the Native Essentials pack, I think. I mean, it is a third-party one. It is one that you pay for. So I would suggest that you do as much as you can with just the widgets and the native controls and the properties and the settings that you have available to you. But if you are interested, if you go to the store, let's just see. Where is it? Other products. Oh, extensions and widgets. It's in there. Yeah, so the mobile native essentials. So it gives you 8 essential native iOS. So it's the activity indicator, switch, date picker, time picker, progress slider, label, and search bar. So if you're interested, have a look at that. But like I say, I would start with just using the native controls that you can create with Mobile Control Create, playing around with the settings on the widgets that are there, and making the most of things like the header bar, footer bar, widgets, etc. Okay, so I'm just going to have a quick look and see what other questions we've got. So Gregoria has asked about a timer. So start a timer, sometime later, stop the timer, and send me a cost. Sorry, Gregoria, I'm not sure what you mean. Do you want to create a timer in LiveCode? Because you certainly can do that. So I think we have a lesson on that, but I'll do a quick example here. So the easiest way is, let's have a start button and a stop button. And this is where we would make the use of some script local variables. So in start, we would do on mouse up, start timer. And in stop, we do on mouse up, stop timer. And then in our card script, because we want these to be able to share some information, we would create a local script variable. So, sorry, a script local variable. So we'd call it local s start time. And we would say on, what did I call it? Start timer. We would put the seconds into start time. We're just recording what time it was started. And then on stop timer, because these are both on the card script, we can both access this script local variable. We would put seconds, or let's do an answer here. So answer the seconds, which is the current time, minus start time, and that will give us how much time has passed. And then if you wanted to do a calculation, you would multiply that by an amount. So we would start, and then we'll wait for a few seconds, and then stop, and that was 3 seconds. So that's the simplest way to create a timer. You just basically record the time that the timer is started at, and when you click on the stop timer, you do current time minus start time. That gives you the time elapsed, and then you can do whatever calculation that you need to do with that. Okay, so I'm just going to have a look and see our other questions. So there are a few in here. Okay, so Nicole's asked about the best way in getting started for someone who's got experience programming in other languages. So we've got a couple of cheat sheets available that sort of give you, I mean, they're very basic, but they give you a mapping from another language to LiveCode just to help you sort of get started. And then there's the resources. I see that LiveCode University has been suggested, yeah, I would say LiveCode University, some of the other examples, But Nicole is interested in a high-level overview of how LiveCode differs from other languages, and I think we do have some resources like that. I know that Kevin, who's our CEO, has done a few talks, things like that. I'll see if I can find some links to resources. We do have our cheat sheets, which I don't know if they are available on our website. So if we go to docs, they might be in there. And like I say, I will see if I can find some other, we have a language comparison section. So yeah, so there's some examples in here. So there's JavaScript, Python, cheat sheets. There's one for LiveCode, and there's one for LiveCode Builder, which is something we've not talked about much, but LiveCode Builder is a sort of supplementary language to LiveCode, and that is what our widgets are written in, which allows us to write these sort of atomic controls in another language. So yeah, so we've got LiveCode Builder and LiveCode for Python and JavaScript, and I think we do have some other examples and some other resources which I'll have to look up. I'm not sure what's in our core concepts here. Oh, that's just that's similar to our user guide. So yeah, Nicole, I'll see what I can find that might be useful for you, and I'll ask Heather either to send it. Actually, maybe if you could send a quick email to support@livecode.com that I can just reply to. I will include them in the slides as well in case anybody else is interested. But if you can send us an email, then I can reply to you directly. Okay, so Mary's asked, I'm an old HyperCard user. It's not that old. When I was at school, when I was at high school, I did my sort of, it's called a higher. It's our sort of highest level of exams that you do at high school. And I did my higher computing project in HyperCard. So I will not accept the suggestion that means I'm old. So LiveCode, yes, it does have an importer for old HyperCard stacks. I believe it still works. I think there was a time where you could just open your HyperCard stack in LiveCode. I don't know if that still works. Again, that's something that I will look into. There may be something in the user guide about that, actually. Let's have a quick look. I don't remember if there's actually anything in here. But certainly there was an importer. Oh yeah, so it says here, Openstack, if you select a HyperCard file, it is automatically converted into a LiveCode main stack. So the first thing you could try is just opening your HyperCard stack in LiveCode. I thought that worked. I mean, I don't think it manages to do absolutely everything perfectly, but that would be the first thing I would try, obviously with a backup for your HyperCard stack in case anything goes wrong. And then one of our longtime users, Jackie, I think she has a software company and they specialize in converting old HyperCard apps. So she might have some interesting stuff on her website. So again, I can include that in the slides or drop us an email and I can reply to you directly with some information about that. But yes, you could just try it. You could see if it imports. And if not, I'll find out a bit more and I will see what I can send out to you. Oh, Mary's saying she's still got some old floppy disks. Yeah, I was clearing out some stuff and I found a floppy disk the other day. Don't think there's any way I could, nothing I could put it in now, but it was when I was at university. I think I had my dissertation on one. Okay, so we've got a question here from Daniel about displaying images or data fields for a certain period of time. For example, for 7 days on from today to a certain date. And yes, you could do that. So it would be something not a million miles away from our timer here. So the seconds is the number of seconds since a certain date in 1970. It's the number of seconds in this eon. And so what you can do if you want to do any sort of timing is I would always suggest using the seconds or the milliseconds if you want to be really specific. And that's because the seconds is universal. It doesn't matter about your time zone, etc. The seconds is a sort of absolute time. So what you can do is, at the start of whatever amount of time you want something to run for, you would record the seconds, and you might do that in, you probably would do that in an external file somewhere in the preferences or in app data or somewhere like that. And then what you can do is, every time somebody opens up the stack or does something, you can check the current time against the sort of start time that you have stored. So that might, if you're doing, I don't know, a trial period for your app or something like that, then what you can do is you can do exactly what we did here. Seconds minus the start time, and that will work for numbers of days, numbers of weeks, months, anything. And you can work out how much time has elapsed. So the interesting thing about the seconds, I'm just going to do this in the message box actually. I don't know if anybody knows about this, but the second pane in the message box will actually let you write multiple lines of code. What I can do is I can put the seconds into tdate. And then what I can do is I can use our convert command. I convert tdate to long time, for example. There's a bunch of different built-in sort of date formats. And then I can put tdate. That will give me 5:51:08 PM, and that is the time here. So that's taken the seconds, which is like a universal time, and it's converted it to my local time. If I think, is it the internet? So if I put the internet 8, gives me, yeah, so then that gives me the so it's 17:51, and it's plus 01 because we're in British summertime, so we're not on GMT at the moment. So it always takes your times, the convert command will take your time zone or the time zone of your machine into account when it's doing conversions. So you can record the seconds, you can do any calculations with the stored seconds and the current seconds to see how much time has elapsed. And then if you need to display it, or if you want to look at it, you can use the convert command to put it into a more readable format. One that's really useful is you can convert tdate to date items. And that gives you the year, the month, the day, the hour, the minute, the second, and the day of the week. So 5 is Thursday because 1 is Sunday. So Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. So from here, again, you can use the chunk expressions that we talked about earlier. So item 3 is the day, item 2 is the month. So that will give you the exact time, including the day of the week. So yeah, so using the seconds, converting, things like that, those are useful. So yeah, so that could be, you could record, it could be from a certain time, or it could be from the, so in the case here, we're using the seconds, so that's the current time, but you could use an actual explicit date, and you would just convert the difference between whatever that explicit date was and the current date using the seconds. It's also a good way to do it because it'll give you a number of seconds, and then you can just convert it into days and, well, minutes and hours and seconds. Sorry, seconds, minutes, hours, days. You can work out if it's been 6.5 days or 7 days. You can just do that using some math. So you can take the number of seconds and work out how many whatevers have passed. So hopefully that will cover what you need. So Gregory was asked, yes, but for example, if I rent a video game for time, then LiveCode after you finish the time, sent me how much does it cost for the client. So you would have to work that out based on, you would record when they downloaded or started up the game for the first time, and you would record when they finished, so when they cancelled it and sent it back or whatever, and then you would just do the calculation. So you know how much time has passed between start and end, and whatever calculation you want to do, you can just do it using I guess, the multiply command. Oh, Nicole, I hope you got the link to those sheets, but I'll just quickly bring it back up here. So if you go to livecode.com, and then at the top there's the docs section, and then just down on the left we've got our language comparison section there. Although I think Lonnie might have shown you where they are already. You're ahead of me. The only cheat sheets we have at the moment are JavaScript and Python, unfortunately. We are planning to add more, but those are the ones that we have at the moment. Yes, Lonnie did say that he is happy to share his stack. I don't know the best way to do it. I mean, I can do it via, if people email support, I'm happy to send it out, but it might be easiest to do it directly. Lonnie's shared his email there. And then Lonnie's asked if we could spend a little time on script-only stacks next week. We absolutely can. If you've got any specific questions about script-only stacks, then maybe you can drop me an email to support so that I can have a look at them in advance, but we can absolutely talk about script-only stacks. Nicole's asked how you handle state management in LiveCode. So LiveCode doesn't really have any built-in handling for state management. It's kind of depends what you want to do with it, but it's something that you'd have to sort of build yourself. I can, if you mean like the state of your app, if your app is based on a state machine, then you can certainly write code to do it. Some of the apps that we've worked on in the past do work like that, but there's nothing sort of built into LiveCode that lets you do that, as far as I know. I will have a look into it because there may be something that one of the members of the community has worked on that would be useful, but not off the top of my head. I don't know of anything. Anytime that we've done it, we have just sort of managed it by writing the code to do it. But I will see if I can find anything that would be useful. So let me just have a quick look and see if there's any other questions in here. So yeah, so Nicole, I'll find out for you because that's not something that I know, but I will find out, and like I say, maybe you can just drop us an email to support so that I can reply to you directly. Oh yes, Lonnie has mentioned there were 2 script-only stacks attached to his project. So yes, I will take a look at that, and we can certainly discuss script-only stacks next week. That's a nice topic. And I don't think there's any questions that we've missed so far. I'm afraid that some of my answers I'll find out and get back to you. But hopefully that's still going to be useful. Like I say, either via an email to support or anything that I think will be generally useful, I will put in the slides. So we've done timers, we've done native fields, we've done a bit about. So there is a question here from Jürgen, which I'd missed. When I create a picture in LiveCode, I can see it, but when I use the Android emulator, the pictures are lost and I can't see them. I've programmed the PDF and copied the picture in the standalone application. How can I do it right that I can see the picture in the Android emulator? So I'm guessing that probably it's just a path issue. So if it is, if you're pointing, so if I add an image control on here, so what you usually do is you usually set the file name or the image of, the source, which is the file name property of the image, to the image you want to see. So let me see if I can find a nice image that we can look at. I should have There's a LiveCode icon. Oh, that's huge. Let's shrink that a bit. And it's still huge. Okay, so there's my LiveCode icon, and it's pointing at /users/Eleanor/desktop/LC icon community. So you say that you have included that in your standalone application settings for your stack. So that means that in the copy files pane, anything you want to have access to, whether that's videos, sound files, images, you would copy in here. And so probably the only issue is that this path here isn't accessible on your Android device. So what you would do is perhaps in the card script, when the card is opened, so on pre-open card, you would explicitly set the file name property of your image. So we can say if the environment is mobile, so that's if we're on iOS or Android, then we set the file name of image logo, or whatever you've called it, and we would use our special folder path resources. So this special folder path gives us the path to where anything that we've included in that copy files pane is. So any files in there are accessible using special folder path resources, and then it'll be and this had a very long name. Might to give it a shorter name, but that should work. So it's probably just a file path issue. So on mobile, you just want to explicitly set the file name property of your image to special folder path resources, which is where any included files are, and then the name of the file, and that should fix it for you. So I think that's probably it. That's probably what the problem is. As long as you are including your file, which is the first thing to check to make sure that you have included that so that it's available on your device, then it's probably just a file name issue where it can't find the file. Okay, let me see. Just about out of time, so hopefully that's covered everything. Lonnie, yes, I will get back to your email with some suggestions, and I will get the slides ready, and I will speak to Heather about the slides that are not available, and also maybe including the YouTube links when we let you know about the replays and the other things that we have discussed. I will do my best to include those in the slides or to get back to you if you email us. So have a lovely evening and weekend, everybody, and I will see you all next week. Thanks for coming along again. Okay, bye everyone.